Hello.
Hi. This is Dr. Jayashree George, and she is a art therapist, a marriage and family therapist, and a relationship coach. And she'll be joining us today to talk about renegotiating your relationship and navigating a relationship in a time when you're not maybe staying with your children, you have an empty nest, or how to go about living your relationship and maybe enjoying a second honeymoon phase.
That'd be nice.
Yeah, that would be nice after your retirement.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So it's interesting. You've set us up with this second honeymoon image. And yes, it's totally possible. And it's possible for those couples who have invested in their relationship such that they make that reality of a second honeymoon during their empty nesting years possible. But what about those couples where the ride has been kind of bumpy? Because you can't think of this empty nest place in your life as separate from what has happened before that. During the time that you got married and then had children, up to the time of children leaving the nest, and you and your partner coming to this place of empty nest, right? So and then even within that empty nest context, everyone's landscape of that empty nest is also going to be different.
Explain the word landscape.
Landscape. So, for example, this opening image of the second honeymoon. So, for some people, the landscape might be very a beautiful prospect. That okay, children are out of the way now. Now we have all this time with each other. We can actually make some plans about how we want to spend that time with each other because our relationship is secure. We have our dreams and plans for this life after 60 or 70 and beyond, that we have a plan about how we want to spend time with each other, and that spending time with each other is actually a beautiful prospect. Now, not everybody's landscape is going to look like that.
Yes.
Right? Because some people would have had some challenges leading up to this point of emptiness, and that challenge can vary between people. So typically, what that means is that what kind of challenges, sometimes it can be a monetary challenge, sometimes it can be health-related challenges, sometimes it can be other things. And sometimes it can be the kinds of things that kind of cut a wedge between you and your partner that has been cutting throughout the time that you've come leading up to the time of this empty nest. And what I mean by that is these what I call third entities. So those entities out there that drive a wedge between partners. So sometimes it can be finances that can drive a wedge between partners. Sometimes it can be kids because you have some kid-related issue that kind of keeps coming in the middle. Why? Because maybe you and your partner have different views about how to raise children, and the kinds of particular things that you have disagreements about when it comes to children. Sometimes you might be having arguments about work. Someone's working too much, someone's working too little. Sometimes you want both partners to be working, sometimes you want only one partner to be working, so on and so forth. Sometimes it's about in-laws getting in the mix, right? Because you haven't had any conversations about the kinds of boundaries you want to have with your in-laws or not. Sometimes it's about TV watching. How much TV do you get to watch, or video games, or maybe it's your kids' video games that are getting in the middle, or you're watching some game that you don't like that your partner watching, and it could be any kind of game.
Usually cricket.
Or it could be something else like porn, for example, that can get in the way. And related to that, it could be about drugs, alcohol, substance use, or about infidelity. So any kind of third entity can enter and cut a wedge between partners, pulling them apart. And so if your bumpy ride has any of those third entities, that's going to be part of the picture when you arrive at this empty nest. So that landscape is going to look quite different.
So is it over then? Is the hope done? Are the people who are experiencing a bumpy ride not destined for a second honeymoon? And
Hope, I never throw out hope, ever. There's always hope. What I would ask you is whether you're both motivated and whether you're committed to repairing the relationship. And if you're both committed and motivated to doing that, anything is possible. If your vision is that even though it has been a bumpy ride, but you both say, I want that second honeymoon.
so is this something you'd suggest partners discuss their second honeymoon dreams, or how do they fix it?
Well, first of all, you have to take inventory of what has happened. You can't sweep things under the rug and say, let sleeping dogs lie. I'm mixing metaphors here. But that dust that you've swept under the rug is going to rear back. There's no question about it. Because and I want to backtrack a bit and I want to talk about the kinds of agreements that we make with our partners. Because that's an ingredient that's going to keep on poking its nose through everything up to this time of emptiness. And what do I mean by agreement? Sometimes you can call it a contract, sometimes you can call it an agreement. But these are the agreements that we make to each other as partners. Usually during a marriage, you take vows, wedding vows. Whether it's a Hindu marriage or Christian or Islamic wedding, you're going to make some kind of promise in one form or another. And sometimes these promises are explicit, like actually taking vows, and that you've even thought about and you've told each other. But sometimes it's just implicit, like you just go through the wedding ceremony because you just go through a wedding and you're not really thinking about the kinds of vows that are being said. But implicitly, you make certain agreements with your partner around simple things like how you want to raise your children, who does what around the house, the kind of gender roles that you want to perform, who works how much, who does the dishes, who does the cooking, how do you manage your finances, what kind of sex you have in your relationship. All of those things are agreements that you make implicitly or explicitly in your marriage, and that gets continued. It's not like you make it once and then you forget about it. But actually, those agreements persist in the kinds of decisions you make and the way you perform your marriage, your marital life.
So do you believe that every time there is a significant departure from a previous time, say one of the partners quits working, or one of the partners is pregnant and has taken a long leave of absence from work, or maybe your in-laws come and stay with you for a while, at every point of time, has that contract been renegotiated without our knowledge?
It may or may not. Usually when you've had a departure from the contract or agreement, when you have a fight. Think about the fights that you've had. What do you fight about? Are you fighting about money? And is that a constant theme in your relationship? Are you fighting about kids? Are you fighting about the mess? Are you fighting about in-laws? When you fight, it's not just about you. You said this. You said that you would never let your family get in the way, but you just opened the door to them. How is that fair? So we're talking about fairness and justice, because that's what usually shows up in a fight. Or you would say, I thought you had my back, but you went off with that girl. I thought you had my back, but you went and you just put your nose in your work and you did not come back. I thought you were going to hold up your end of the bargain and pay the bills on time, but you couldn't even do that. Right? So those are the times that when your agreements have fallen apart, you have an argument. So if you are conscious about fighting for your relationship during those arguments, so that you use the arguments as a cue to restore the health of the relationship, then what you're doing is repairing. Hey, I know you told me to pay the bills. I messed up. I can do that. Or, you and I don't have the same view about how to raise our children. But how about we say that When it comes to these things, you and I are going to have this sing from the same chorus line. But when it comes to these other things, you have to let me do things the way I do it, and that's what I'm going to do. And when it comes to these other things, you do it, and I'll lay off your back. So there you've just renegotiated the agreement when you talk like that.
I mean, but that's a very explicit
That is
renegotiation.
very,
I think
very
I think
explicit.
everyone would agree that that has been renegotiated.
Absolutely. But sometimes you might do that implicitly by saying, okay, you know what, I'm not going to bring up this issue as a fight because let's take stock. I like the way he does da da da, these things. And these are some things that he doesn't bother me about when I do it this way. So the only thing I'm going to really argue about is when it comes to vacation time, that's important, sacrosanct. Or maybe it is about the fact that I want my mother to come stay with us for a month. That is non-negotiable. And these are the kinds of agreements that will persist during empty nest. How sometimes it will be kid related. So that's the other thing about the landscape of emptiness. I think the landscape of emptiness also changes depending on the generation. So, for example, in my parents' generation, and your parents, well, maybe not in your parents,
No,
your grandparents'
my
generation,
grandparents' generation, yes.
they were much younger when they reached that point of empty nest. Maybe in their late 40s, they were already empty nesters. Because they got married earlier, they had their kids earlier.
Their
and
kids
so
had kids earlier.
Their kids had kids earlier, and so they became grandparents far earlier. And they did not have this overseas problem because their kids stayed around either in the same state or at least within the same country. So the idea of a long distance familial relationship was not really in the picture. But that landscape has drastically changed in the last 30 years. Where it is more commonplace for parents to have children who are necessarily overseas. And so then you have grandchildren who are also overseas. And then there is this kind of traffic that is going back and forth between India and to these other places abroad,
Right.
where grandparents have to travel. So then it's incumbent on the grandparents to be healthy enough to be able to make that travel. Affordability is an issue about making that travel.
Of course.
And health affordability is also an issue in making that travel. And then emotional affordability, that you have the emotional resources to go back and forth and take care of your grandkids over there, and then you might still have grandkids in this country, in India, that you're taking care of. And then your role as a grandparent is also called into question because maybe you are required to provide that care for grandchildren because both parents are working. And then now you might have to take care of the grandchildren in another country where you may or may not speak the language while your kids are busy working. And then the cultural differences, because taking care of grandchildren in India is different than taking care of grandchildren who are born in another country. So then suddenly there is a sea change. So your emptiness landscape is drastically different than it was for your parents when you were children.
Right, definitely. Because I remember my grandmother was in her 40s when I was born.
So there is a high demand for grandparents these days to be highly elastic, emotionally, health-wise, and physically. Literally and metaphorically, they have to be elastic. To be able to stretch themselves across continents
Right.
and be able to be available. And in the middle of all this, how to take care of their own marital relationship in this time of sea change. You yourself are in a position of deep transition, because it's emptiness is also a state of loss.
Well,
Because
also retirement, and your routine has been disrupted.
exactly.
So to speak.
So not only have kids left the home, but you're also facing your own retirement. Have you thought about it ahead of time? Have you planned for it? Many people don't really plan for it. So it's a time of loss, and sometimes it's an unrecognized loss. because we don't think of retirement as necessarily a loss, but it is, because you lose your schedule, you lose your payment, you lose your support network, and you lose a
You
sense
lose
of your
routine.
identity, because many times we are most often identified with our work, and then when you lose that, and then you're like sitting here at home, suddenly you're just watching TV, and then if you have had a rocky relationship with your partner, you don't know what to talk about,
Or even what to watch.
or even to like, or you might get mired in your old conflicts, and it's just painful. So then again, you open the door for third entities to walk in, like things that are unhealthy. So in that state, I strongly suggest like some explicit conversation or some kind of relational help might be helpful if you are in a place of relationship distress. I would strongly recommend it.
And is this something that they can go at on their own, or will they need a professional such as yourself to kind of step in? Or is that completely?
Well, it depends, because it depends on the nature of the distress and the intensity of the distress. If it is an intense distress, then other people are going to feel it. Your kids are going to feel it. Because if it's been a conflictual marriage throughout your relationship, your kids have known about it, and you've probably had some, what we call cross-generational alliances. It's a fancy word to say sometimes your family might be split along, oh, daddy likes this kid and mommy likes this kid, and then, you have your factions and your coalitions, and it makes for a fractured family setup. And then in walk in daughters-in-law and sons-in-law, and the picture gets more complicated about who's aligned with whom, and then what is common to the whole thing is a theme of conflict. So if that has been your theme, getting help might not be a bad idea.
So before we set up this meeting, we were talking a little bit about about there being three components to maybe helping or repairing a relationship, and I think you had mentioned that was evaluating your relationship would be the first step, whether you need help, whether you're okay, whether you're not,
True.
and then also then moving on to more repair steps that you had about. So watch the next video, and we're going to talk more with Dr. George about these